I was 17 years with it, and I mean properly with it, day in, day out for 17 years. It never disappeared once. But I was starting to lose hope. The 17 years, and I was thinking I now had kids and things like that. I was really thinking, I don't want to live another 40 years, or 30 years when I die, feeling this way, like I'm watching myself in a movie, can't connect with anyone, and floating through life. But it's gone completely, and it's not something I thought would ever happen.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with David McHale from Dublin, Ireland. David is 43 years old. He struggled with depersonalization disorder for 17 years. He describes having had feelings like thinking nothing was real, feeling like I may have been in a coma, and that there was a constant screen between me and the world. But thankfully, David has since finally recovered. I was thrilled to recently receive an email from David where he said, quote, "I did your course and after 17 years of DP, I'm free from it. Thank you doesn't quite capture my gratitude," end quote. And David is with us today to talk about his experience with and recovery from depersonalization disorder. David, you're very welcome to the channel. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the channel. David, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm getting older. I'm 43 now. I am based in Dublin. I have a wife and two kids, and I work in the field of marketing. So that's where I am right today. But that doesn't tell, I suppose, lots of other things to be going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. What kind of marketing do you specialize in?
I work. I work in brand management or brand marketing. I work for a travel tech company. That yeah, we're like the eBay of buying and selling things on in the travel marketplace. So we're been there a few years and it's going great.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with depersonalization disorder and how did it start for you?
It's a long time ago. So it's I was 25, and I've thought about it an awful lot as to when did it really start. I think the first blip or the first thing that happened along the way. I remember I was traveling through New Zealand at one point, and I was kind of on a round the world trip for about 15 months. And I remember kind of driving in a car. I'd rented a car and coming around a corner for a mountain and just looking at a mountain that just seemed very flat. Total visuals, everything was totally skewed. And for about 20 or 30 seconds, it looked like everything looked like a bit like a computer game. You used to play those games in the 90s where you'd be driving and the kind of in the background, you would have the screens, the mountains, and they didn't really change. It felt really weird. And it went, and I didn't think anything of it. And then fast forward, I kind of had been traveling for a year, 15 months. I came back. I think it's safe to say by the time I came back, I was absolutely exhausted. I put I was coming back. I was thinking or hoping at that time that there was a relationship with the girl that I was with, that I thought we may be getting back together, and it became maybe a focus for me in the last couple of months. And I came back quite underweight. I was actually depressed, technically depressed. And it all there was a lot going on there. I think I'd probably overdone it on the partying stakes and just having a good time for those times. And when I came back, it was a big change going back to Dublin, back to Ireland. My last flight was coming out of Rio de Janeiro, straight to Dublin. It's a big change of scene to come back. Friends had moved on, everyone had moved on, and people were working, everything was going on. And I think I found it quite difficult to kind of reintegrate at the time. So I think what happened, I had quite a tough summer. The girlfriend that I was, or the ex-girlfriend that I've been trying to get back to, that didn't materialize. And it was time for me to get a job, really. So between me this kind of relationship that didn't work out, and getting my first proper job. I think there was an awful lot of stuff going on and building up for me, which I just wasn't able for. And I think what happened in probably the week or so running up to it, I remember all of a sudden waking up one day and going, nothing feels real here. Trying to ignore that feeling of this, well, I thought it was a feeling, but more thought that nothing feels real. And for a whole week, I remember just documenting in a diary. I used to write an awful lot, still down through since about the age of 15, right to today, documenting what I was thinking. And a really interesting kind of week of slowly falling into this, what's going on, nothing feels real, the world doesn't feel real, and I'm progressing and progressing and progressing. And what happened then was I was out on a night out, where there was a lot going on that night out, and I kind of came back home and I was very upset, and I decided I was going to say something to my parents because I couldn't deal with this anymore. That nothing, the world felt completely upside down. I felt at an incredibly low ebb, combined with this, and nothing really made sense to me. So I came back home that day and I spoke to my mother, really broke down and crying and very, very depressed and very hopeless at that moment of time. What happened then next was went to see the GP. The GP gave me kind of some antidepressants or something like that. And to be honest, it felt good that I'd given this, released this information, confided in people that things didn't feel right, but immediately it was down as depression. So, and there was no doubt at the time I was depressed. I had lost interest in everything. I couldn't understand why. So look, I'm a big football or sports fan. I remember watching sports and going, I don't understand why people would do this. There's no point to any of this. Like, why would you follow a football team? So all those things of just nothing made sense. So what happened was I kind of, I got, I would say, over the depression. It was a really tough few months, particularly that day or two afterwards. I literally cried for, I would say, 36 hours straight. Couldn't stop crying. Didn't know that many tears could flow out of the body. Just could not turn it off. And everything was just, should never, I was not someone who cried an awful lot, full stop, but this just didn't stop. And then it stopped. So I kind of went down the I suppose, the usual route of kind of CBT, a little bit CBT, and kind of going to see a psychiatrist maybe / psychologist, and taking on some antidepressants and things. So that was it in the sense of where the story began. And I think from what happened then was started to say, yeah, geez, this depression, I feel a bit better, but God, this depression isn't going anywhere. So what I was labeling it first as was depression. And every time I looked it up and read into it, it didn't sound like the symptoms that I had. So that sense of hopelessness, that absolute dire feeling of what's the point, had actually lifted. I'd gotten back, started into work. I was probably, getting back into a slight feeling of normality, a slightly more normal life. But this feeling of unreality didn't disappear at all. So I suppose what happened next is in the bit where I suppose I clocked it, this wasn't just depression, was I have a sister who's a psychiatrist, who kind of I'd spoken to a few times about it. And very luckily, I suppose, then it come back and said, it doesn't sound like, depression anymore. Does it sound, and we kind of walked through symptoms and things. And she said, I think it may sound like something a little bit different. And we talked about then depersonalization, derealization, dissociation, and those kind of areas. So I think that's when the penny dropped, and it wasn't that long afterwards. It was maybe 5 or 6 months after that depressive episode where, I had the depression had lifted, but I was left with something else. And then all of a sudden it started to have a bit of a label. It may have been, so I can't quite figure out the timing. It may have been 6, 9 months later after the episode, but it was a while later.
What year was that, David? What age were you?
So I was 25. So I'm an 80s kid. So just about 1980. So 2005, that happened. The depressive episode, I think itself. That was around June, around summertime. I'd come back. It was around October. Then this thing all kicked off, and then I think it was probably the next. About it, maybe it was maybe a year later. My sister, you're talking maybe 2006, towards the end of 2006. My sister had kind of come back to me and said, maybe this isn't depression. This is something else in terms of the label for it. Yeah. So what I can continue on there if you just if you want me to.
Absolutely, but I'll just interject briefly and mention that it is kind of mind blowing to me that that was the same year so 2005 was when I had my my first panic attack, and when the onset of DPDR. As far as I remember, it was August. I think it was August when it happened. So it's mind blowing to me to think that like we were a couple of hours away from each other, kind of going through something very, very, very similar, and kind of both searching for answers. Well, that's really, it's a very striking thing. But yeah.
So I suppose what became interesting, and I kind of it's an interesting part in your own course for your own book, where you talk about going to healthcare professionals and them not knowing what you're talking about. And I do remember going in, the first psychiatrist that I went in to see, he prescribed me the kind of antidepressants and stuff. And I had said to him, look, after about a year going, my sister's also a psychiatrist, and she has said it's maybe not related to that. It's more just depersonalization, derealization. Do you know much about it? And being totally shocked when the psychiatrist on the other side of the table started Googling it. I said, no, let me Google that. So my faith, on the one hand, I had a sister who was a psychiatrist. On the other, I had a psychiatrist who was Googling it in front of me to look up what it was all about. So I knew at that point, I suppose it was a first pointer for me, how little was understood about it. What kind of became interesting then was I decided, I then met I met my then wife out about a year later. So I hadn't changed many habits. I was still going out, still enjoying myself, doing things. It hadn't changed much of my social life and things like that. So I met her and decided then a few months later I was going to, there's probably actually fast forward now in towards 2007 now at this point actually. So there's we met that summer of 2007, and I decided I was going to move over to London. I always say not to be with her, but it was to be with her. I always say it was to see it because I had lots of friends over there. But it was also to give things a shot with her and see how it goes. So it was funny because my two things happened. One, I went over the week the whole world collapsed. That week when Lehman Brothers, the whole economy in Ireland collapsed. So everyone said to me, "Oh, geez, you fair dues, you really understood when things were going to fall apart, and you obviously saw the writing on the wall." I kind of kept that going for a while. Yeah, I could really see it, but the truth was I had a plan for a few months. So I went over, and as I was heading over, my sister said, "Hey, I've got this book called overcoming feelings of depersonalization and unreality or something like that. And it was from the Maudsley Clinic that I'd written at the time. And it was this book, which I thought, well, this is all my answers are in this book. This is great. So I brought it with me. And I was with my then girlfriend, now wife, about 4 or 5 months. And when I moved over to London, I was staying with her. And my bed, and I hadn't said any of this to her. So my bedtime reading beside the bed was this book. And if you look up the front cover, you'll know what I mean. It's pretty much bold writing, overcoming.
Yeah.
It's like a comedy sketch. Who is this lunatic that I have allowed move into my house? So she said, "What's this about?" And I said, "Well," and then for anyone who suffers from it, and you've explained it really well in your book and in your course, that's a hard one to explain to someone, particularly back then. I didn't. I'm surprised she's my wife. I'm surprised she stuck around when you actually hear the symptoms, because they're bonkers. And no one could ever fathom, unless they've been maybe on some sort of drugs experience, what you're talking about, but actually how you can actually function with these symptoms. So that's kind of the start. I know that sounds like 2 years, but it actually, in my head, that's the start. That's the label. I've got a label for it. I've got a book that doesn't work, but seems promising. And basically all roads leads to the Maudsley Clinic for this book on how you're going to treat it and what you're going to do with the medical profession about this course. And I would say after that, look, loads, fast forward, if I could crunch my life story for the next 15 years, so that's the first 2 years, and then there's another 15 years of it with it. Lots of different work with therapists, CBT, EMDR, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, loads of mindfulness training, being a teacher on mindfulness courses. And I don't know if you've come across EMDR, just, I don't know if you're aware of that it's kind of the light trauma piece. Lots of them kind of going off on roads and reading lots of things about trauma, the body keeps the score, all that really good stuff. And I think from my perspective, dancing around a lot of what was, hey, I just want to focus on something around depersonalization. So long period of going through to those things, 17 years of different work that was really amazing, really worthwhile, because I found out or discovered an awful lot of things I think about myself and went on my own journey that way. So I suppose if I want to look on the right side, there was lots of benefits in that way, but it didn't tackle any of the symptoms.
Just going back to your experience in New Zealand, it's something people say to me very often, is that like they will have had like brief experiences of that sensation of disconnection, maybe when they're younger, especially if you're a kid or a teenager, and you might have this briefly, because it's a very natural thing to experience briefly. And then as they get older, and then they may have an experience with chronic anxiety, which, 1 in 3 people will have, but then they'll recognize that same feeling of disconnection, except this time it's not going away. But what's really interesting is that that typically the reason it went away so quickly when you were younger is because you were younger and you kind of had a shorter attention span. It might have freaked you out for a minute or two, but then there was a squirrel over there. You just kind of got more interested in, or your parents offered you ice cream or something, and that was the end of that.
Yeah.
It's when we kind of become more self-aware that we have the tendency to focus on these things and then catastrophize. It's so lovely to hear that your sister was such a source of help, and that she was able to spot that. And do you know by chance, David, was her awareness of depersonalization like something that she had come across in her study, or was she kind of like looking into this on your behalf, or how did she come across it? Do you know?
I don't actually know. It's a really good question. I need to check back with her. I don't know if she remembers. Look, I'd say she's fairly open-minded in terms of psychiatry and its limitations, and also how it plugs into other programs. So, I think she's been someone who was always broad-minded. May have been speaking to a colleague about it. I'm not sure. Done her own research. I mean, 2005, the internet is a very different place in terms of how much information is available. And I don't know this. So I'm not 100% aware. I also would say as well, I've been very lucky. I have a sister's psychotherapist as well. So I have four sisters. Two of them are in that sphere. So I think between the therapy and, let's call it, the medication side of things, or the and this, I was well equipped, I think, or I had a lot of support, I suppose, for pointing me in the right direction, which it definitely helped. Even though it took an awful long time to find the right answers, I think at least you had someone you could go back to. And I think that, the thing with medicine and moving over to the UK and all those kind of things, great to have someone who could advise you which questions to ask your GP and which, what supports to ask for, and ask them this question, are they able to do those things? So I don't think I would have been able to get a lot of that if my sisters hadn't been able to advise me on that.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
In terms of the thing of like exploring, like learning about the mechanics of trauma, and like maybe trying to find an explanation in that sense. I remember I had a period like that as well. It wasn't as kind of extensive as what you're describing, I think, David, but like I certainly had a period where like the only explanation that I had for the scale of what I was experiencing was that like that something must have happened to me, like some traumatic experience must have happened to me that I can't remember. Because that was the only thing that felt kind of like commensurate with the vastness of what I was going through. But the problem was that I had a great childhood, there is no trauma to speak of. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've had ups and downs. I'm an introspective person. Like I've struggled in many different areas, but I never had experienced like trauma. And that kind of became almost a point of confusion, because I was like, but what happened? Now what actually did trigger it for me was like a bad drug experience, and then a panic attack, and then a subsequent panic attack later. But it was very hard for me to get my head around the idea that it could be something as simplistic as a panic attack that could set it off, or that it could be even an accumulation of anxiety that could set off this alarm system and then cause this feedback loop to keep going. But yeah, can you speak a bit more about that, about how your exploration of the mechanics of trauma affected you, or didn't affect you?
Yeah, no. So yeah, and trauma as a word is only something that's probably come into kind of my sphere of interest and reading, because honestly, I read an awful lot about various things, self-help books, a lot of various things down through the years, and I've forgotten the guy's name. The kind of, I'll come back to it in a moment. So where I think it's with trauma, or just general kind of, before it gets onto the trauma topic, I think in the therapy was all moving along for me, like functionally pretty well. All my story started the same way. My story started with you, which is, when did this start? And I tell a story of backpacking, and tell a story of going off, and tell a story of coming back, with a world not prepared for, and a breakup of a relationship I was hoping to salvage, and a job, and all of it too much. But the reality is, so when I would go back into therapists, and went to lots of different therapists, where, tell us about yourself, and that's where my story started. And they would always say, and tell us about your childhood. And I said, there's nothing to tell there. It's just the happiest time ever, isn't it, really? And it was actually just before this, so that 2 year period before I moved over to England, where it was my very last session. It was probably a week or two before I was moving over. It was supposed to be just a finish up session with a therapist, and it was Gestalt therapy. Was that type of therapist I was going to, and she asked the question. We ended up with this memory of me as a child. Very young, because I don't have much memories of me. It's funny, my wife was like, I remember when I was 3, I did that. I was like, you don't remember when you were 3? I did this thing when I was 2. And I was like, no one remembers. But it's just me. It's not just me. There's loads of people. I don't have many memories before the age of 5. But I had this one striking memory of being at a table in my family house. And as I said, I'm the youngest of 7 kids. And I'm far younger than some of my siblings. My eldest sibling, there is, I think, 17 or 18 years between us. So when I grew up in that house, and a lot of my siblings, some of them moved out before, I don't really remember them being around. So everyone goes, oh, it must have been amazing for you to live with 7 brothers and sisters and your parents. Well, it wasn't really for me. I always felt this very young, smaller part of what seemed like a connected unit. And I felt quite different. And I had this amazing moment in one way of this, in this final therapy session, where I could kind of went back into that position of this young, and maybe 3 or 4 year old sitting, looking, observing all these grown-ups, these big people around a table, and not feeling part of it whatsoever. And that was a big kind of breakthrough moment for me, where that was the start of questioning what was going on. And, I came from a family where my father was an alcoholic, and he, he is an alcoholic, I suppose, technically, but he hasn't drank since since 1985. And he does amazing stuff around alcohol, AA, spirituality, all those kind of things. And it's always been kind of, on my radar as to the way he was thinking. But the narrative in my family was always, well, you were lucky because he gave up drink before you can remember anything. And I think there's an element then when you kind of start to go through different therapy and different things that go on. 2 things struck me. And there's the book, The Body Keeps the Score, if anyone has read that, talks about the formation of the personality and the person between the ages of 0 to 5. And that's, my dad gave up drink when I was about 4 or 5. And that house was chaotic at those times, but everyone, I think, probably felt that I was shielded and things like that, or that the children don't know. Now, I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old now, and I can see what they see, and it's not that they ignore it. So I kind of get into various therapy sessions where I start to acknowledge actually that most of my time was spent outside of the house, playing with friends up on the green. The last places I really wanted to hang out was in the house, because even when my father had given up alcohol and drink, there's the repercussions of that. So it's not like everything goes back to being rosy. I'd say my parents, they're amazing. They're married a gazillion years. How many years are they married? Almost 60, I think now. Wow. But that period was tough for them, and there was periods where they didn't speak and things like that. There was an animosity, I think, between the 2 of them that lasted. And there's also a feeling, right, that the children don't notice those things, but they do. So, and I found that silence really vicious as a child. So as I started to, retrospectively now, it wasn't like, this all became very obvious to me in my 20s, what my story was. So it's going through a lot of therapy where you go, I can see why the body did what it did to try and shield me, and why I felt disconnected, and why a lot of things happened the way they did, because of, not just because of my childhood or things like that, but I think there is a story there. And I think therapy was very useful in connecting myself to that to that story, to that young boy, and kind of understanding the reasons the way I am, in sense of personality traits, the way I respond to things, either positively or negatively, when I get aggressive about certain things, when I'm like unhappy, if I feel unheard, those kind of things, kind of, you can understand it now a lot better. It didn't do anything for me in relation to fixing my depersonalization, but I think it played a really important part in it. I think the trauma aspect, I suppose the interesting thing for me about trauma is you've got your big T trauma, which is, something horrific happens, you see a family, someone being murdered in front of you, big trauma. Go into a therapist, you can talk about that and they know where to focus. The little trauma of that, the way I explained, is that long period where nothing major really happened as a child, but it just didn't feel great in a lot of time of it. That's kind of this. So that's harder for therapists to come in and try and hone in and go, let's do some EMDR in this big moment, because there is no big moment. And I don't want to put this, because I'm sure my parents may actually be watching this video or this recording. I don't want to put it on my parents or the rest of the family that that's the reason, or that I had a particularly bad childhood. They did an awful lot of amazing things for me. But it definitely, when you look at your story and you come on to something like this where you want to help people with your story, I think it is, good to be transparent around things that made sense to me, as in around my own story.
Certainly. That's it's so wonderful that you've got such a sense, a clear kind of introspection into that process, like, and that it's clearly been beneficial to you. So to jump forward again, David, so you're in London, so you're reading the book Overcoming Feelings of Depersonalization, Derealization from the Maudsley Clinic.
Yeah.
Did you ever go to the Maudsley Clinic?
No, I went to a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and tried to get them to refer me to the Maudsley Clinic. The feedback, and look, I really compliment those therapists and psychologists. The feedback I got was that they thought that what we were doing in that local NHS clinic was going to be comparable to what was going on in Maudsley. A couple of things happened as well, where, they'll do, when you go in to see therapists or psychologists or psychiatrists, often when you're first assessed, you're doing all these rating scales, basically trying to figure out how depressed or anxious you are. They don't do depersonalization stuff, or they didn't back then. So between medication and therapy and mindfulness, my life, the acuteness, I suppose, of the depersonalization wasn't as bad. I felt things felt more manageable. So I think from their perspective, they were seeing this trend of, well, this is all actually improving and the hope being, this will just fizzle away, these feelings. So I never ended up going to the Maudsley Clinic.
And in that time, David, did you, had you kind of developed any kind of coping mechanisms, or kind of, in looking back on it, had you had any kind of patterns of avoidance of things, or were you kind of just living your life basically as normal, but with this persistent feeling of depersonalization?
Yeah, probably that. I wasn't really avoiding anything. I was going out. I was with friends, very social, lots of drinking, but I mean, on the weekend, I wasn't, I was holding down my job. I was keeping myself busy, yet I was still going to Buddhist center to do mindfulness and go away on Buddhist retreats. So I had this kind of weird balance of these this kind of partying lifestyle. But yeah, you could see me the next week in a Buddhist retreat, on a silent retreat. So I was trying almost everything, um, and but I was keeping a very active life. I think, there was certain things that I wouldn't say certain things I started to notice over time that could trigger maybe a little mix of like depersonalization or anxiety. That could be certain crowds seem to do it for me, like shopping streets, things like that, which didn't stop me shopping. But I was kind of more aware, started over time, things that tended to trigger it. In later life, I think some of the harder things, like spending time with my kids, was a real struggle, because what I found easy was work. Work was really easy. I could throw myself into it and actually bring my best self almost into it, because you had this, the relationships are fairly, well, they're work relationships. So they are what they are. There's nothing, pouring much into them. There's not a huge amount expected back from you. But relationships with people that actually matter, as in your family, as in your siblings, parents, and then your new family and your friends, that was much harder for me. I remember, part of my job is to work in marketing and design and things like that. And the therapist would ask, how do you want to explain this? And the easiest thing for me was to kind of use graphic design to explain it. And it always felt for me this, I had these rings of protection that I wanted no one to be able that were stronger around the actual more important people in my life. And I do remember, it was very tough, particularly when the kids were small. My wife would, or not my wife, would be my term to get up in the morning and find the kids, because it was, they woke up at 7 or 8 in the morning, and going down there and being absolutely the depersonalization. I would always put it on a scale, as in, how does this feel right now? And it would be up at 9 with the kids, and my body wanted to shut down. My body wanted to go to sleep. My body wanted to do everything to get out of that situation. And it's terrible, because you should be trying to connect with these people, but also you're coming across like incredibly lazy, incredibly avoidant on trying to do what you're supposed to do as a father. So it was really hard. They were some of the tougher moments where you should be engaging with these people, and it's part of what you want to do. And actually, they tend to be the hardest one. And my wife would see me in work mode. She would see me buzzing around on conference calls, coming out, give my best self, and then retreating. And that feeling like I wasn't giving myself to, wasn't giving myself to the more important things in life, or that I didn't, maybe she didn't say this, but maybe that I didn't care for those things as much as I did my work. And it wasn't that at all. It was this: work was so easy. Those other bits were so easy. And these other relationships were hard.
Yeah. It's something that people say to me, and I certainly experienced, was a deep sense of frustration with feeling like you're unable to connect with your family members or friends of family members, and I can see how like work is kind of would be easier in a way, because there's less kind of at stake emotionally in it, but also you're, just because of the nature of the environment, you're very much kind of focused on completing a task,
Yeah.
I remember something that like somebody said to me in an interview, I think, was that like, struggling to like spending time with her father, and she's saying like, I was trying desperately to connect with him, and I couldn't feel the connection, and that's all I could think about. But what was really interesting was when she said it, when she recovered, was that like when she was talking to him, like it's not like when you're talking to your family members that you're verbalizing to yourself, I feel really connected to you, the process of connection happens in the background while you're in a flow state of just spending time and watching a movie and reading a book and playing Scrabble or whatever.
Yeah.
It's the constant kind of interruption of it that makes it seem like it's a problem, because you're kind of fragmenting the flow state by checking in on it repeatedly. But I could see how that would feel more feel stronger with a family member than with a work colleague, because you would feel it is more emotionally at stake for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know that there's so much to cover. I mean, it's a long period of time to cover, but at what point, David, did you start to see progress and start to see recovery? And also, like, in this time, were you kind of, because like we're talking as well about, like, I mean, I remember what looking for DP and DR was like in 2005 on the internet. There was no social media, like YouTube didn't exist. I remember there was like one forum that I was haunting for like day in, day out. But like after 2007, I mean, aside from writing the book, like, but I really stopped kind of like interacting with that and searching for it, like, or having alerts and stuff. But were you kind of monitoring that, like, over the development of the awareness of the condition over that 17 years? Or was it something that you just kind of set aside and you were just like, I'll try and figure this out on my own?
Mine was a similar kind of thirst for information, but all around depersonalization rather than depersonalization, which in retrospect wasn't the best idea. So I was focused on finding information about trauma. I was focused on information around mindfulness, about all these various things that I felt were pointers to this thing. Because, you know, I think one thing, I've come back to that book on Maudsley Clinic. The way I came out from that book was actually, there isn't much that anyone can do about this, and it's kind of up to yourself. And I didn't really, for whatever reason, I kind of went bigger and broader, as in, it's anxiety, it's depression, it's tons of stuff around existentialism, just lots of stuff around kind of Buddhism, and trying to get in touch with just mindfulness, as in lots of lot of work around mindfulness, and feeling that was the path to overcoming this. If I can be in the present moment, that'll get rid of these thoughts or this feeling of unreality. Of course, this is the thing to do. Or I'm going to work on getting fit, or going to try all these different things. So I consumed a huge amount of books. I think The Body Keeps the Score, then that was a bit of a change. I think was probably the beginning of, I won't say the beginning of the end, but the beginning of a shift in all this other stuff felt kind of like, you know, if you ever come across a hobby that you slowly get into, and all of a sudden you come across, or say you're into films, and all of a sudden, you know, you think Gladiator's the best film ever, and then all of a sudden you come across some French avant-garde, and you're like, whoa, what was I doing over there? There's this whole world. That's what I felt when I started coming across Bessel van der Kolk and those kind of people. I still can't remember the trauma guy's name. It's killing me. I've read about 3 or 4 of his books around trauma and addiction.
Gabor Mate.
Gabor Mate, yeah, that's it. So kind of started going, and then I came to this really great therapist that my sister had recommended. Great guy, Craig, Canadian therapist, and I really started to work on EMDR and what we call brain spotting, and it was like staring at these spots. He's literally just staring at a wall, a spot on a wall for 40 minutes and going, that's it. and you're listening to some music. It was all kind of bonkers, but I liked the fact that I had the background from Bessel van der Kolk. It seemed like it wasn't that alternative because this was all starting to prove its way, but very much focused on trauma over the last couple of years. Big focus on childhood, trauma, mindfulness, all these kind of things. And then, you know what? I probably in the last year or two of it you had come up, your book had, you had come up, and I kind of kept on seeing this Irish guy coming up on my screen, and I was like, well, an Irish guy running a course, well, he must, for whatever reason, I must be anti-Irish. I was like, well, I've got all these international superstars. There's someone at close to home is going to have the answers. It's like, that the film analogy is, I'm in with all my French avant-garde stuff. I know where the good stuff is. There's no way someone has come across it. And I remember seeing, and then, I was plugging along with the therapists and the MDR, and it was going okay. I felt like lots of stuff was happening, breakthroughs, but again, all related to my own story as opposed to the symptoms. And that was it then. I came across your website, had a look at it about 3 or 4 times, and said, I can't remember, it was like in the grand scheme of things, it was peanuts. It was like whatever it was to buy it. And I said, will I buy this? And I said, oh, sure, why not? I've done about a million other things. And I remember I reached out to you because my credit card didn't work. And I remember you came back directly to me and kind of had given me some other pointers, which I thought was amazing just at the time. It wasn't just like, wasn't just put in your CVC number. It was like, what's your story? That's amazing. And you said you will get better. And you were another person on my journey who was telling me that they were going to help me, and I was like, oh great, thank you, your heart's kind of in this, but believe me, there is no solving for me. There isn't enough solution. There was, in my head, there was absolutely this, and that was kind of one of the lowest points, I think, up to that, coming into that last year, was the feeling that now it was 17 years, this is it. And I remember saying that to the therapist and kind of and my sister and others, and getting the response of, okay, and if it is, what does that mean? That's not what I wanted to hear. I just wanted to hear constantly, something is going to work for you. But I was starting to lose hope. The 17 years, and I was thinking I now had kids and things like that. I was really thinking, I don't want to live another 40 years, or 30 years when I die, feeling this way, like I'm watching myself in a movie and can't connect with anyone and floating through life and having no control of anything. So I think so it coincided with actually quite a low period of hope for me. And then I came across you and your story and downloaded it, and I within 15 minutes I knew it was going to work. I just knew it. I went back to the therapist the next week and I said, we're done. And I knew, because I've been to so many therapists, I know that's not the way. You don't just go into a therapist after 2 years and say, hey, I think we're done. There's normally a wind down period. And he was very understanding. He's like, sounds amazing. Absolutely. And I knew it. I knew it straight away when I heard some of your analogies about the flu and a cold, and it just completely clocked. And I just knew everything made sense. Everything made sense, that it was nothing that I thought it was. Nothing. I thought it was a feeling. It was what it was. I think you said in the intro, I thought you gave this analogy that you thought you were in, or not an analogy, you gave a story that you had a thought that you were in purgatory. My version of that was a coma. I thought that I had been in an accident and that I was in a coma. It was my hope, and that I was going to hear a voice in the background, like in a movie, that was going to say, wake up. And I was going to wake up and go, oh my God. And I did have a couple of surgeries down through the years where I always hoped that I went under anesthetic, that was my hope. Whatever the surgery would happen, that I would come out and I would feel right again. And obviously it didn't happen that way. So anyway, that was the turning point. Getting your, it was actually, I listened to it on the audio book as opposed to reading the book.
I'm so happy to hear that the book was helpful, David. It's really interesting what you're saying, the thing about reading voraciously about anxiety and all of the kind of the surrounding material around DP. And I absolutely did that too. Like, I mean, when I first developed it, I was living in Cork after college, and living my best life. I was a full-time musician. Life was good, and then life wasn't good, and I moved home. I had to move home with my parents, and I stopped working, stopped exercising, everything stopped. But I filled my life for those 2 years with, I read every possible thing I could about anxiety and just like trying to figure it out. And in a way it was, I mean, it was a very positive thing in that it kind of gave me information that I was able to condense into the book, but also retrospectively, I think that it wasn't the best thing to do to stop all of my work and put all my focus on the condition, because then the condition kind of takes up the entire windscreen. It takes up all of your view. What I found actually was that, like, in all the stuff that I read about, anxiety treatments and cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and all these different kind of approaches to thinking about anxiety and how it relates to depersonalization, was that I found that all the information was actually out there, but it just was all completely fragmented. It was all in different places. So I'd read like a massive book about anxiety, and I would find maybe 2 things in there that I felt kind of related directly to me. Or I would read a book about obsessive compulsive disorder, for example, and I would find that there would be a couple of specific things there in terms of like obsessive thoughts, for example. I even remember reading things about like the imp of the mind, or no, the imp of the perverse, which is like I think it's Edgar Allan Poe talking about like obsessive thoughts, but finding kind of like these little kind of like breadcrumbs and things that go, oh yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. But finding these kind of counterintuitive techniques that were somewhat present in CBT, and then to a lesser degree present in other things, but then putting that information together and going, oh, this is what seems to work. But what blew my mind was that, like, that information not only did it not kind of collectively exist in one place, but also that for me and for you and for most people at the time, was that, like, if you went to ask about this condition, that like they'd quietly turn to their computer and start looking it up. And it was like, it was kind of mind blowing, but it's fascinating to me that you did something very similar, in that kind of just going off on this kind of trek of ingesting as much information as you can on not maybe not specifically the condition, because there was so little out there, but all the surrounding landscape about it to try and figure it out.
Yeah. Totally. It was kind of like that a little bit. You might get a chapter or half a chapter in a book around depersonalization, but it was what I find interesting. It felt like, this was a whole condition. I like the way that, it really resonated with me when you said, well, it's a symptom of anxiety. First of all, it was like mind blowing for me. Because I always felt, why are you just devoting half a chapter or paragraph to depersonalization? Like, this is the whole thing. Where's your whole book on this? And that's always how it seemed to come across, was, and I know you explained an awful lot of that, why that actually makes sense, because you can function. You can be this highly functioning person but I used to go into, particularly in the NHS, into wait for my therapist or see a psychiatrist. I always felt really bad because those people around me were clearly in a worse state than me. I could see it. They were rocking. They were, I was this professional who was showing up, and I felt really guilty that I was kind of using NHS resources to look for help at the time. And I do think, sorry, slight tangent, but I do think that is a challenge when I had enough money to go to private therapy sessions and all those kind of things. And as I said, I had enough advice on how to get support through the NHS or other places when it was public. And not everyone has that. And I think the other thing that's really tough with it, if you do go to therapy and things like that, is that you're paying someone and the clock is ticking and you want results. And you, for anyone who's gone to therapy, you can go to 5 or 6 weeks at a time and talk about what you ate for lunch, and then come out of that and go, what the hell was that? Why am I paying this guy or this woman 70 quid to hear her? And I got nothing from it, and you're looking for instant results. So I think, and anyway, it's just the whole system of how it's set up for mental health. I think there's an awful lot of things that aren't right with it. And I think, someone like yourself who's written this book, who kind of, he's taking bits from everywhere. I think it's really hard because that's the first thing. The therapists who I said, hey, look, I've got this book. I'm done here. He said, like, why isn't this guy? Why aren't you? Why isn't this being taught everywhere and so on? And he said, where is his research being published? I said, I don't know if that's his story. And he said, well, maybe that's it. He wasn't saying it in a dismissive way. He was totally supportive of, wow, look at this thing. But how things work in the medical profession, which is a totally different topic, is that's how there's a way that this stuff gets transferred. And I think that's the really harsh thing is, I since have been asked by that therapist, by my sister, by a few other people to send me your website and various things because they have loads of patients coming through with the same symptoms. If anyone hears this or has gotten this far into the video, I was 17 years with it, and I mean properly with it, day in, day out for 17 years. It never disappeared once. And when I got your course and I was hearing, you reiterated that a few times, I think that's really important for people. I don't know anyone else with this. I've never met anyone with this. And anytime I've spoken to anyone who else has had anxiety, depression, and been in a low, they can't really comprehend it. But for anyone who may be listening, I just think I had it for 17 years, and I heard 1 or 2 stories about people saying you can overcome it, and I just thought, I'm not that person, but I love. Great, good on whoever else. It's just not me. It's me. I'm going to be on my deathbed, and I'm never going to have cleared this thing, and I'm just that person. And fantastic that this has worked for someone, but not me. And that's the thing I'm most shocked about. I don't know what your longest number is on here for someone who suffered from. Maybe it's plenty more, but it's gone completely, and it's not something I thought would ever happen.
That's so great to hear, David. Yeah. So what was it like? What was the recovery process like for you? I mean, what in terms of like was it a kind of like a winding down of the feelings? Of what was it like to kind of start to have moments of normality after 17 years of DP?
It was kind of like that thing. Maybe if you've been, I can't think of it exactly. Maybe in work, you've just been told you're probably going to get a promotion, but you can't tell anyone, and you don't want to jinx it. So it was kind of this thing where I said to my wife, I think this is kind of working. And I really wanted to downplay it because I didn't want to tell anyone, because we'd often talked about it. She'd like say to me, what are you going to do if you ever overcome this? Are you going to go out like mad? Are you going to run around? I said, I don't know. And then all of a sudden it was happening. It was happening over probably the course of about 6 or 8 weeks. That feeling of was starting to lift, and then maybe it would lift and be gone for bit really low level, or totally gone for could be 10-20 minutes or so. And then it was kind of going, it was fading. It was like a cloud of vapor that was just clearing around, but there was little bits left where I thought, oh shit, don't get too excited. Look at that. That feels a bit 2D-ish, doesn't it? Or shit. And then just get out, do the distraction thing, do all the things he said in the audiobook, just start doing these things again. And it was so funny because it was the complete opposite, of course, of everything I've told you about mindfulness. Sit in a quiet space and, be aware of your thoughts and breathing. I was, the music that I would listen to, and I still listen to, Estonian minimalist music, was not the stuff for distraction. And so I would get back into that. I would then feeling pretty good about myself, and then just kind of one day, I suppose I said, I think I'm done. I think I'm done with this, and then it allowed me to talk to other people as well about it. I hadn't really said it to anyone in my family, or wasn't comfortable saying it to friends. I'd said it to a couple of friends, but I just wanted to go back to them now and say, I'm over that thing I mentioned to before. But when I mentioned it to them before, I told them maybe 5% of what was going on, and just say, look, there's this thing where I kind of feel things feel a bit unreal, and that's no big deal, but but not painting that picture. So that was kind of it. It was about 6 to 8 weeks of and still, I think there's still part of me, though, there's definitely part of me that is like, because it's a year on now, it's 17 years prior. There's definitely thoughts that creep back in, that not the same thought of, or is life real, but of fear, anxiety that this may come back at some other point. This, the only good and they last just for a split second, because I think the one thing I never read up about, or never thought about, was the compulsive thought process, that compulsive thinking. And in reality, anyone who knows me knows this. I have like mad sensitivity to noise, to little clocks, to things like that. So this idea that I always, as well, going through life, always felt like I would have that signs. I would always say, if I don't know, can't even think of a decent example, but if I found £5 note and I was on my way to England, which is actually what happened, that was all to show this. That was England was where I was going to make my money. So, but everything, the little signs along the day I would say, well, if this thing happens, that my wife. So I often had these little kind of quirky things, and I still do. But so I think there's part of me, anyway, just to come back to that, which I found that really interesting in your story, that it is just this compulsive thought, basically, disorder. I never had thought I'd seen those stories, those shows, and I got, oh geez, I've got some of those traits, but never had thought this condition was it. But it's kind of useful for me just to come back to that, to go, don't be worried about it. I still am. And I think that's the one thing, I think, for me, as well, with the book and the story, is the bit that's maybe missing, that maybe you've got a prologue or a part 2, because I do think you're kind of left now to your own devices, and you don't want to look back because you don't want to jinx it, or you don't want to go back to doing those things. But also, there's 17 years of me being unable to connect to anyone. I don't feel like I'm going to go back into therapy about those 17 years. But there's also this weird thing you kind of have to ignore to move on. And that's and if you're someone like myself, who's all his the levers he's pulled to overcome stuff as being therapy or doing things, it feels like, what am I supposed to just forget that this actually happened? Like it was essentially a hostage in a veil of fog for the last 17 years,
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting how like there's so many of the things to move away from a condition like DP, and so many of the kind of compulsivity that kind of underlies it. It's very counterintuitive. Like there's a lot of kind of things that feel like, because when we have like the thoughts, especially the existential thoughts of DP, like they feel like an emergency. It feels like, DEFCON 1, like I have to fix this now. And then it feels deeply counterintuitive to not do that, and to understand that like so much of the reason that this has been progressing for so long is because of the attention I was giving it, even with the best of intentions with that attention. But something you mentioned that's a really good example of this is downplaying the progress that you make in recovery. Because when I first started to see results back in 2007, I was just like, yes, like I was like, no, we celebrate, like, and then, but when I did that, there would inevitably be a spike in the anxiety like the next day or 2 days later, because I was categorizing it as something that was worthy of celebration, and part of recovery is saying like, no, it doesn't deserve that. Like what you're categorizing this in the same way as you would categorize shoulder tension that you had back in 2019. Like it's a thing that happened, but you don't need to like celebrate it or be frustrated by it. Like what you're aiming for is like being indifferent to it, essentially. So in downplaying the progress that you make, you're actually helping the progress, which is a really, really, really positive thing. So now that you've recovered, David, after 17 years, so what's your day-to-day life like? It sounds like you're a pretty busy guy.
Yeah. I Look, life is so right now, as in, so I've been in a kind of a weird, really weird last year. So I kind of, let's just say I recovered from this, from depersonalization. It was about a year ago. Is that right? Yeah, about a year ago. I then have noticed transformation in my relationship with my kids, my wife. My wife mightn't agree, but my kids do. And but no, honestly, all that layer that was there, it's totally, totally different. Everything, my feelings, the authenticity of those feelings, the non-questioning of those feelings, all those things have gone away, and I kind of take it for granted, I think, and that's what we touched on earlier. You kind of have to just move on and just ignore what it was like. But that's an amazing change for me. I think lots of things going on. Lots of things, lots of interesting discussions I've had at a family level as well. My own, as in my siblings and my parents, which have happened as well on the back of this, which I still think there's plenty to chat through on that side of things. I think it's always, I think anyway, more to work on in that sense. And I think for me anyway, just look, I've moved house. I've just lived in my father-in-law's house for almost a year, so everything has felt on hold. So that's why I'm in. If anyone is looking at this video going, what kind of room am I in right now? I'm in a new attic that's just being furnished. Sorry, it's unfurnished, so it doesn't look like I'm in a cell. I'm not actually bringing it from a mental hospital. In a padded cell. If that's, now that I look at it, that's the vibe I've given off here. No, but everything is good. Everything is good. I've yeah, without boring people about my own personal life, all the balance that I kind of, or this big thing is just being lifted. And I think it just gives me optimism. I said to you earlier, my thought was just, I'm going to be dead in 40 years on a deathbed. And going to have had to say to someone, I lived for 55 years with depersonalization and didn't get to experience life. And that doesn't happen. That I don't feel like that. I feel, I wouldn't say like another chance at things, but life is much more colorful. Life doesn't feel like I'm totally being just passing through it and trying to, protect myself in some sort of ball from what's going on around me. So look, it's not, I don't want to pretend like my life is transformed into this magical thing, because that is the funny thing that you talk about. When it happens, it's not like someone just switched the setting on your TV screen to bright color and you went, oh shit, I didn't know it could do that. It's just a slight tweak. And so nothing visually changes, or not a huge amount visually changes, but everything does change in another way. So, I just wanted to say thank you so much to you. I'm so happy to come to actually meet you. I put off dropping you a note for the guts of about 9 months because I didn't know what to say, because nothing could capture it in terms of thanks. There's, particularly in the English language anyway, I don't think there's. That's why I said Gur Malgat in the subject line, because I think there's, look, for someone who's just telling you and everyone else who's listening that, essentially my life has been changed in an unbelievable way in the life of my family, my kids, and everyone who knows me because of, something that you had written down and put together is unbelievable. You won't see what happens in my life after this, but I just want you to know that that's an unbelievable gift you've given to me and to others, and it's I don't know what I would do if I hadn't read it.
And that means the world to me. I'm so happy to hear that, David. Yeah, that's really beautiful. And for our international viewers, Gurv Malgut is Irish for thank you.
Well, it literally means can I put the good on you, right?
Yes,
yes,
it is actually, and it's kind of similar to the like Australia, like saying good on you, like that you have the good on you. Yeah, it's lovely. David, it's been so lovely to speak with you. I know there's going to be people watching this who find your story absolutely inspirational, and especially people who've been going through it for many years. Recovery is always possible, and I'm so happy that my book was helpful along the way. So thank you again so much for being with us on the channel today. It was lovely to meet you.
Yep. Okay. Thanks a million.
Yeah. Slán a god.
Slán.